What you're about to hear is not just history, it's a warning. This is a real American story about prisons, power, and terror. If you want true crime that goes deeper than headlines, you're in the right place. Subscribe now, because stories like this are never taught the full way. The knock came before sunrise. It was hard, loud, angry. Boots stomped across the wooden porch as men in dark coats surrounded the house. Inside, a Klansman jolted awake, heart racing. For years, he had ridden at night with a hood on his head and a gun in his hand. He had burned homes. He had dragged men from their beds. He had never once feared the law. Until this moment, a federal marshal kicked in the door. Rifles came up, shackles clanked, papers were read out loud in a clear, calm voice. The charge was conspiracy, terror, violence against citizens of the United States. By the time the sun rose, the man was in chains. Across the South, the same scene played out again and again. Klansmen were pulled from barns, back rooms, and hidden cabins. Some tried to run, some reached for weapons, some begged. All were stunned. The Ku Klux Klan was being hunted, and for the first time, the hunters wore government badges. But as prison doors slammed shut behind hundreds of Klansmen, one terrifying question remained. Would locking them up be enough to stop the terror, or only make it come back stronger? That answer was still waiting. Years earlier, after the Civil War ended, America was supposed to heal. Slavery was over. The Constitution promised new rights. Black men could vote. Black families could own land. Black children could go to school. But many white Southerners refused to accept this new world. Out of that anger, the Ku Klux Klan was born. At first, it pretended to be a social club, but it quickly turned violent. Members wore white robes and hoods to hide their faces. They rode at night. They used fear as a weapon. They whipped teachers. They shot voters. They burned churches. They lynched men in front of their families. The goal was simple: terrorize Black Americans into silence. Stop them from voting. Stop them from gaining power. Local police often looked the other way. Judges refused to convict. Juries were filled with Klansmen or their friends. The Klan believed itself untouchable. They were wrong. By 1870, the violence was impossible to ignore. Reports poured into Washington. Entire counties were under Klan control. Elections were being decided at gunpoint. President Ulysses S. Grant had fought in the Civil War. He had seen death. He had seen rebellion. He knew this was not random crime. This was domestic terror. So Congress passed the Enforcement Act, one law after another. These laws gave the federal government new power: power to arrest, power to prosecute, power to suspend local control when states failed to protect citizens. Most shocking of all, the laws allowed the president to suspend habeas corpus in Klan strongholds. That meant suspects could be arrested and jailed without immediate trial. For the Klan, this was unthinkable. They laughed at first. They believed no one would dare enforce it. Then the arrests began. Federal marshals rode into South Carolina, North Carolina, Mississippi, and Alabama. They carried arrest lists filled with names whispered by terrified witnesses. Klansmen were dragged into courthouses in chains. For many, it was the first time they had ever faced consequences. Some broke immediately. They told investigators everything: names, meeting places, secret signals, murder plots. Others stayed silent. They believed the Klan would protect them. It didn't. For a brief moment, it felt like terror was losing. But inside prison walls, something else was happening. Klansmen talked. They shared stories. They blamed the government. They blamed Black citizens. They blamed anyone but themselves. Prison did not change their beliefs. It hardened them. Some promised revenge when they got out. Others swore the Klan would rise again under a new name. And outside the prisons, pressure grew. White politicians complained that federal power was too strong. Newspapers called the arrests unfair. Voters grew tired of military presence. Reconstruction was losing support. President Grant faced backlash. Funding for enforcement dropped.
Troops were slowly pulled back. Prison sentences ended. Cell doors opened. Men walked free. They returned to their towns quieter, but not defeated. The robes came back out. The fear returned. The terror had paused, but it had not died. And the nation learned a painful lesson. Prison could stop men, but it could not kill an idea. As the Klan regrouped and violence crept back into the night, one truth became clear. America's first prison crackdown on domestic terrorism exposed both the power and the limits of incarceration. The real fight was far from over, and what happened next would shape how the country handled terror for generations. If you think prison alone can stop hate, stay with me, because the next chapter reveals how the Klan adapted, survived, and struck back in ways no one expected. The prison gates opened with a slow, heavy groan. Men stepped out squinting into the sun, thinner than before, faces harder. They carried small bundles of clothes and something far more dangerous inside them, anger that had been sharpened by months behind bars. Neighbors watched from a distance. Some felt relief, others felt fear. The Ku Klux Klan was coming home. In many towns, the violence did not explode right away. It crept, it whispered, it waited. Former prisoners kept their heads down in daylight. At night, doors closed earlier, lamps went out faster. Black families listened for horses on the road and prayed they would pass by. The federal troops were gone now. The marshals had moved on. The enforcement acts were still law, but the will to use them was fading. That was the opening the Klan needed. Meetings began again in barns and back rooms, not as loud as before, not as bold. The robes were hidden, the masks were folded and put away. This time, secrecy mattered. They spoke of the prisons, of the cold cells, of the shame, of how the government had dared to put them in chains. They promised it would never happen again. Across the South, elections approached, and black men still had the right to vote on paper. In real life, that right was under attack. Threats returned, jobs were lost, crops were burned, loans were denied. Violence was often hinted at, not shown. Fear did the work. Federal officials knew what was happening. Reports came in again, whispers of intimidation, quiet attacks, men beaten and left alive to tell the story. But Washington was tired. The country wanted peace. Many Northern voters believed Reconstruction had gone on long enough. They wanted to move on, even if justice was unfinished. So enforcement weakened. Some judges became hesitant. Juries refused to convict. Witnesses lost protection and went silent. The prisons that once scared the Klan no longer felt like a threat. Still, the government did not fully give up. In pockets of resistance, federal prosecutors tried again. They reopened cases, they summoned witnesses, they prepared new indictments. The response was swift. Witnesses disappeared. Some fled their towns, others recanted their stories, claiming they had been confused or pressured before. Fear was winning again. Inside former prison cells now filled with new inmates, a bitter lesson spread. Many black men were arrested for small crimes, vagrancy, loitering, missing paperwork, charges that barely existed before. Convict leasing returned in full force. Men were sent from jail to labor camps, railroads, mines, farms. The conditions were brutal. Many did not survive. Prison had changed shape. It no longer held the terrorists, it held their victims. This shift sent a clear message. The system was no longer fighting terror, it was absorbing it. Some former Klansmen now wore suits instead of robes. They ran for office, they controlled sheriff's departments, they decided who got arrested and who walked free. The Klan did not need mass violence anymore. It had power. A few brave voices tried to warn the nation. Journalists wrote about the return of terror. Activists spoke in churches and town halls. They begged for protection, but the audience was shrinking. Then came the election of 1876. It was one of the most contested elections in American history. Accusations of fraud, intimidation, and violence filled the headlines. In many southern states, black voters stayed home, not because they had lost the right to vote, but because they feared the cost of using it. The Klan did not show its face. It did not need to.
When the election ended in chaos, a political deal was struck behind closed doors. Federal troops were withdrawn from the South. Reconstruction officially ended. The last line of defense was gone. For many former Klansmen, it felt like victory. Prison had delayed them. Politics had saved them. But not everyone accepted this outcome. In some communities, resistance continued. Local groups formed to protect voters. Churches became shelters. Teachers kept classrooms open despite threats. They knew the risk. They also knew what silence led to. The Klan responded with warning signs, a note on the door, a symbol scratched into wood, a visit in the dark, not to kill, to remind, and it worked. Fear spread faster than hope. Federal prisons still existed, laws still existed, but without enforcement, they were empty threats. The great prison crackdowns of the early 1770s was now a memory, a warning of what could have been. Yet, something important had changed forever. The Klan knew it could be beaten. They had felt it. They had tasted fear behind bars, and that knowledge haunted them. They became more careful, more patient, more political. The terror did not end. It evolved. As the decade closed, a new generation watched closely. They saw how prisons had nearly destroyed a terror network and how quickly it returned when pressure eased. The lesson was clear. Prison works as long as the will to use it remains. And the moment that will disappears, the cell doors might as well be wide open. In the next chapter, the story turns darker. We follow the long shadow left by the KKK prison crackdowns and how their failure shaped the future of American justice, domestic terror, and mass incarceration. The silence after Reconstruction was louder than the riots that came before it. No soldiers, no marshals riding in at dawn, no prison wagons waiting at the edge of town. Just quiet streets and fear that lived inside people's homes. By the late 1970s, the great KKK prison crackdowns were officially over. The laws were still written on paper, but the energy behind them was gone. The government had stepped back, and the space it left behind was quickly filled, not with justice, with control. Former Klansmen now sat in courthouses, sheriff's offices, and state legislatures. They did not wear hoods anymore. They wore authority. And they understood something the nation had failed to grasp. You don't need terror every night if the system itself does the work for you. Arrests shifted targets. Black men were jailed for walking without proof of work, for standing on corners, for being poor, for being visible. Crimes became vague, flexible, and easy to apply. Prisons filled again, but not with terrorists, with their victims. Convict leasing expanded rapidly. States handed prisoners to private companies, mines, railroads, farms. Guards were paid per body. Deaths were cheaper than care. Men worked until they collapsed. Some were beaten for slowing down. Others were buried without names. This was punishment without trial in all but name, and it was legal. The same prison system that had once terrified the Ku Klux Klan was now being used to protect its goals. The irony was brutal. Federal officials knew. Some spoke out quietly. Reports warned that prisons had become tools of racial control, but the country had moved on. Economic growth mattered more. Political peace mattered more. Justice was too expensive. The memory of the KKK prison crackdowns faded from public discussion. Textbooks softened the story. Newspapers stopped asking questions. But inside black communities, the memory never left. Parents warned their children, do not travel alone, do not argue with police, do not draw attention. Survival depended on caution. Prison was no longer just a place, it was a threat. But even in this darkness, the earlier crackdowns left a mark. The Klan never fully returned to its old form. They knew the federal government could strike back if pushed too far. They stayed fragmented, local, hidden, more careful than before. That fear, the memory of chains and cells, never fully disappeared, and neither did resistance.
Black leaders organized quietly. Churches became centers of planning. Newspapers printed truth even when presses were burned. Teachers stayed in classrooms under threat. They remembered what had happened when the government acted. They believed it could happen again. The story of the KKK prison crackdowns became a warning passed down through generations. Not a victory, a lesson. Prison alone cannot destroy hate. Laws without enforcement are empty, and when justice pauses, terror adapts. Decades later, new terror groups would rise. New prison crackdowns would come. New debates would rage over safety, rights, and power. Each time, the shadow of the 1870s returned, because America had already learned this lesson once and forgotten it. The Ku Klux Klan was not defeated by prison, but it was exposed by it. Exposed as fragile, afraid, dependent on silence and support. And every time the nation chooses whether to act or look away, it walks the same road again. If this story shocked you, stay with us, because understanding how terror survived the prison walls is the first step towards making sure it doesn't again. And the next time the knock comes before sunrise, the question will be the same. Will justice follow through or fade once more? The papers were already signed when the knock came again. Not on a cabin door this time, not on a barn, not at dawn. This knock echoed through the halls of Congress. A stack of reports hit the table. Testimonies, prison records, death counts from labor camps, election numbers that told a quiet story of fear. Lawmakers read them in silence. Some looked away, some clenched their jaws. They all knew the truth. The KKK prison crackdowns had worked once, and then America had stopped. The shock of the 1870s had faded, but its consequences were now everywhere. Prison populations were rising fast, not because crime had exploded, but because laws had changed who counted as a criminal. Vagrancy laws spread. Contract laws trapped workers. A missed payment could mean jail. Jail could mean labor. Labor could mean death. The system was clean on paper, dirty in practice. This was not the chaos of night rides and burning crosses. This was order, rules, ledgers, chains with receipts, and it terrified people more than the Klan ever did. Some officials tried to fight back. A few senators pushed for investigations. A handful of judges refused to enforce unfair laws. Journalists followed the paper trails from courthouse to labor camp. What they found was hard to deny. Men arrested by local sheriffs were sent to private companies. Companies paid the state paid the sheriffs. Everyone made money, except the prisoner. In some camps, death rates were higher than during slavery. There was no reason to keep a man alive if another could be replaced him tomorrow. Prison had become a business, and terror had learned how to wear a tie. The memory of the KKK prison crackdowns haunted these debates. Supporters of reform pointed to the early 1870s and said, look what happens when the federal government acts, when it protects citizens, when it uses prison to stop terror instead of feed it. Opponents pushed back hard. They warned of federal overreach. They said states knew best. They said reopening old wounds would divide the country again. Behind those words was fear. Fear that real enforcement would return. Fear that prison doors would once again close on powerful men. As the years passed, new generations grew up without knowing the full story. They learned about Reconstruction in short paragraphs, about the Klan in vague terms, about prisons as places for criminals, not as weapons. But the past never stays buried. In the 1890s, the Klan would rise again under new names. In the early 2000s, new terror groups would form. Each time, the same pattern appeared. Violence, fear, public outrage, then a choice, act or retreat. Every time the government acted fully, terror shrank. Every time it hesitated, terror adapted. The blueprint was written in the 1870s. Prison works when it is paired with courage. Without it, prison becomes a cage for the powerless and a shield for the guilty. The story of the KKK prison crackdowns is not just history, it is a mirror. It asks uncomfortable questions that never go away. Who does prison protect? Who does it punish? And who decides when justice ends? The men who were arrested in the 1870s are gone.
The prisons they filled have changed shape. The laws have new names, but the struggle is the same. Terror tests the system, and the system reveals itself in how it responds. The knock before sunrise still happens. Sometimes it brings justice, sometimes it brings silence, and the future depends on which one answers the door. If this story made you think, stay with us, because the past is not finished speaking, and the next knock may already be on its way. The knock never really stopped, it only changed hands. By the time the 1870s faded into the past, the country told itself a comforting story. The Ku Klux Klan had been defeated. The worst was over. Prison had done its job. America had moved forward. But in quiet towns and back roads, people knew better. They had seen what happened when the pressure was lifted. They had seen how fast terror learned to breathe again. Former Klansmen taught their sons without words. They spoke in lessons, not speeches. Who held power, who did not, who the law protected, who it punished. The robes were gone, the night rides were
Courts that charged harshly for small crimes, juries that never questioned arrests, prisons that swallowed people and never explained why. Fear no longer needed a mask. It had paperwork. For Black families, prison became part of everyday life, a threat that hovered over ordinary moments, a walk to town, a missed job, a disagreement with the wrong person. One bad day could mean chains. And once inside, the door rarely opened quickly. Convict leasing expanded deeper into the South. Men vanished into mines and camps. Letters stopped coming. Bodies were returned without answers, if they were returned at all. The terror was quieter now, but it lasted longer. Some historians would later say the KKK prison crackdowns failed, that they were temporary, that they did not end white supremacy. That is only half true. The crackdowns proved something dangerous to hate groups. They proved fear could change sides. For a brief moment in the early 1870s, Klansmen hid instead of hunted. They whispered instead of shouted. They felt watched. They felt vulnerable. That memory never fully disappeared. It shaped how terror operated from then on. Groups became more political, more patient, more careful, less visible. They learned to work within systems instead of against them. That lesson echoed far beyond the Klan. Every future domestic terror group in America would study the same question. How do you survive prison? The answer was always the same. You make prison work for you. As the decades passed, prisons grew larger, laws grew tougher, populations behind bars exploded. The language changed. Order, safety, control. But the roots stretched back to Reconstruction, back to the moment when prison almost broke a terror network and then was turned away from it. Some reformers never gave up. They kept writing, teaching, organizing. They reminded the country that the KKK had once been stopped, not by silence, but by action. They pointed to the enforcement acts, to federal arrests, to trials that actually mattered. They asked a simple question: why did we stop? The answers were never simple. Politics, fatigue, racism, fear of change, and convenience. It was easier to let injustice settle than to keep fighting it. By the early 20th century, the KKK would return in a new form, larger, louder, more public. And once again, the nation would be shocked. Once again, prison would be debated as a solution. And once again, history would whisper a warning. Prison without commitment is a pause, not an end. The true legacy of the KKK prison crackdowns is not found in numbers or laws. It lives in the pattern. Act hard, act fast, then hesitate. And every time hesitation wins, terror survives. The story does not belong only to the past. It belongs to every moment a society chooses comfort over courage. Every moment it believes time alone will fix hate. Every moment it locks the wrong people behind bars and calls it justice. The knock before sunrise still comes.
The only question left is whether the door will open to real accountability or to another long silence. If you stayed with this story until now, remember this: terror does not disappear on its own. It waits. And what we do next decides whether history repeats or finally breaks. This story ended, but its consequences never did. What happened inside those prison walls still shapes America today. If you believe truth matters, even when it's uncomfortable, stay with this channel. Subscribe, because some stories are too important to forget.